In the heart of a kingdom defined by ceremony, loyalty, and unquestioned obedience, a queen lived inside walls that appeared golden from the outside, but in reality operated as a chamber of silence and fear. Her life was surrounded by ritual, guarded by tradition, and confined by a structure that granted her visibility but denied her freedom. The empire she served honored symbols more than truth, and every woman at court learned early that silence was safer than honesty, even when honesty could save lives. Within those walls, suspicion was treated as treason, and one whispered truth could end a dynasty. The queen understood the consequences of speaking openly, yet she chose to do so, believing that a sovereign should be guided by morality rather than convenience. Women in royal households across history were not merely companions or consorts. They were political instruments, bound by alliances, and protected only when they remained compliant. Many queens, princesses, and noblewomen kept their grief hidden, trapped behind ceremonial duties while navigating systems created to prevent them from challenging authority. Their suffering was rarely documented because their pain was considered private, domestic, or irrelevant to official chronicles. In royal courts, every emotion had to be controlled, every gesture observed, and every word measured. The queen in this story believed that truth could protect her kingdom, but her honesty was interpreted as betrayal. This atmosphere defined her daily existence. She belonged to a ruling house that presented itself as benevolent and enlightened. But internally, absolute obedience was expected. The king demanded loyalty not only from his subjects, but from his closest family. Royal marriage was not a personal union, but a strategic instrument. Women married into power were expected to support the king's narrative, regardless of whether it aligned with reality. Questioning authority was treated as disloyalty, and disloyalty was considered more dangerous than treason. The queen lived with these expectations each day, but she was not born into silence. Her upbringing had been shaped by scholars and advisors who taught her that truth preserved kingdoms longer than secrecy. In the first minute of this story, it is necessary to remember something important. History tends to celebrate rulers who enforced control, but the voices of those who resisted quietly, especially women, often disappeared. Their courage did not fit the narrative of empire. Their warnings rarely reached archives. Their suffering remained unspoken. Those who listen to forgotten stories understand their value. Audiences who stay with this journey honor the hidden victims of power. This is the spirit behind Dark Inquest History, a space dedicated to remembering individuals who paid a high price for honesty in controlled societies. This video explores the queen who was tortured for telling the truth about her king. The kingdom existed during a period when hereditary authority was seen as divinely sanctioned. Royal blood determined destiny, and questioning a monarch was equivalent to questioning sacred order. The political landscape was shaped by military expansion, strict social hierarchy, and an emphasis on absolute loyalty to the throne. Counselors and officials surrounded the king, yet most of them were rewarded for obedience rather than accuracy. The queen observed these dynamics from within the palace and became increasingly aware that decisions made without accountability were leading to unrest, famine, and distrust among common citizens. She believed that truth was necessary for stability, but women in authority were tolerated only when they supported existing structures. A queen was expected to be calm, elegant, and reserved. She was supposed to represent moral purity without challenging the mechanisms that sustained patriarchal dominance. Her duties included ceremonies, charitable patronage, and mediation within the palace, but never criticism of the sovereign. The queen, however, possessed a strong sense of justice. She had seen the consequences of misrule. markets depleted, villages frightened, soldiers fatigued, and families wandering in uncertainty. She felt compelled to speak openly about the king's declining judgment and the consequences of his decisions. Her warnings were first shared privately, through gentle persuasion and subtle concerns. She addressed economic instability, diplomatic tension, and administrative negligence. She suggested reforms that would protect the people and restore confidence in leadership. But the king interpreted her honesty as interference. His advisors encouraged suspicion, insisting that women were emotional, impulsive, or incapable of strategic insight. They told him that queens should not influence state matters. They insisted that her views undermined masculinity and threatened royal prestige. The king listened, not because their criticisms were accurate, but because affirming male authority reinforced his self-image. This created the first wave of conflict inside the palace. The queen noticed that her counsel was increasingly unwelcome. She was told to remain silent during meetings. Officials avoided her presence and treated her concern as an invasion of royal space. Rumors began circulating that she was too outspoken, too independent, and far too concerned with matters reserved for men. Court attendants whispered behind closed doors that she was stepping beyond her station. The queen understood that social pressure was building, yet she refused to embrace complacency. Outside the palace, conditions continued to deteriorate. Trade routes were disrupted, harvests became unpredictable, and a growing sense of uncertainty spread among workers and farmers. They saw a monarchy that appeared detached from common struggles. Reports reached the queen from her attendants, describing shortages, disputes, and fear among families who depended on royal protection. The queen brought these concerns directly to the king, urging him to examine the reality outside the palace walls. She argued that leadership required listening, humility, and responsibility. But her honesty collided with royal pride. The second wave of conflict emerged when senior advisors warned the king that the queen's transparency could destabilize the royal image. They insisted that monarchs must appear infallible, even when they were not. Revealing internal weakness was considered more dangerous than addressing it. Public opinion mattered to royal legitimacy, and any admission of misjudgment could invite doubt. The queen believed that concealment would eventually lead to greater crisis. But palace officials viewed her truthfulness as a threat to their influence. They benefited from the king's reliance on secrecy and did not want accountability or reform. Tension intensified with every attempt she made to speak. Instead of engaging with her, officials began isolating her. She was excluded from discussions, denied information, and treated as an ornament rather than a partner in governance. Her reputation was quietly undermined, not through direct confrontation, but through gradual marginalization. Every dignitary who visited the palace sensed the queen's fading presence in political affairs. The king, influenced by his inner circle, grew suspicious of his wife's intentions. In this historical context, kings controlled courts not only through law, but through fear. Questioning them inside the palace could be interpreted as a political offense. The queen's honesty, originally motivated by security and ethical duty, was now viewed as a personal rebuke. The court was filled with individuals who had everything to gain by silencing her. No one wanted her voice to remind the king of his mistakes. The third wave of escalation emerged when a diplomatic crisis placed the kingdom under scrutiny. Neighboring regions recognized instability and watched closely for signs of division within the palace. The queen understood that foreign powers were interpreting royal silence as internal weakness. She urged the king to address grievances openly and to introduce policies that would help rebuild trust among citizens. Her words were respected by a small group of scholars and attendants who understood her sincerity. But their support was insufficient against a council intent on preserving its authority. The advisors argued that the Queen's concerns were exaggerated, emotional, and potentially manipulative. They claimed that she wanted to influence succession, foreign relations, or court alliances. The king, increasingly insecure, believed their warnings. He began to suspect that his wife's truth was not truth at all, but a form of opposition. Historical records suggest that royal paranoia often developed in environments where leaders surrounded themselves with praise rather than accountability. The Queen witnessed this transformation in real time. Silence became an expectation rather than a suggestion. The Queen was instructed to speak only during ceremonial duties. She was reminded that her position depended entirely on royal favor. If she continued to warn others, she would be accused of spreading dissent. She felt the atmosphere shift around her. Doors that once opened freely were now guarded. Correspondences that once circulated were now restricted. Trusted attendants were quietly reassigned. The palace, once familiar, was becoming a surveillance space. Yet she continued to believe that the truth mattered more than her comfort. She felt moral responsibility for the people beyond palace walls. She could not watch suffering unfold without intervening. So she did something rare in historical royalty. She told the truth publicly. Not as a dramatic declaration, but as a careful, reasoned statement to a council of nobles who requested clarity on the kingdom's financial state. Her honesty was met with stunned silence. No queen was expected to contradict the king's narrative, especially in front of nobility. This became the turning point. The moment she spoke openly, officials realized that her voice could reach beyond palace gates. If nobles trusted her version of events more than the king's, royal authority could fracture. For monarchies built on divine legitimacy, questioning leadership was equivalent to questioning cosmic order. That fear became the catalyst for the darkest part of her story. The king, influenced by his advisors, concluded that the queen had endangered the throne. He accused her of disloyalty, not because she had committed any crime, but because her honesty challenged royal control. She was removed from ceremonial roles and placed in a secluded residence within the palace grounds. What happened next did not involve dramatic spectacle. It involved silence, pressure, intimidation, and prolonged psychological distress. Historical documents do not provide graphic detail, and they do not need to. The Queen endured severe mistreatment behind closed doors. She was interrogated repeatedly, pressured to retract her statements, and encouraged to confess wrongdoing she had not committed. Royal officials insisted that she apologize publicly for exposing internal weaknesses, but she refused. She believed that the kingdom deserved transparency. She understood that fear maintained the throne, but silence would destroy the people. Her resistance angered the court. The mistreatment she endured was not intended to destroy her body. It was intended to destroy her certainty. Those who questioned monarchs were often punished harshly, but the methods were rarely recorded. Palaces prefer to erase evidence of internal discipline. The Queen lived through conditions no one should endure, and yet she remained committed to truth. She believed that leaders who hide reality eventually face greater collapse. The fourth wave of escalation occurred when the king demanded that she denounce her earlier statements. She refused, even while under coercion. She would not tell a falsehood to protect royal vanity. This act of defiance shocked the court. Officials were accustomed to submission. A queen resisting authoritative control represented a symbolic fracture in patriarchal order. Her persistence threatened the king more than her words did. At this point, the palace implemented measures to silence her entirely. She was denied visitors, denied correspondence, and excluded from official record. There were no celebrations in her honor. She became invisible inside a space designed for spectacle. Her daily existence became a form of confinement, silent, controlled, monitored. The Queen experienced emotional isolation more severe than many forms of physical punishment. She lived under continuous scrutiny with no opportunity to advocate for herself. In large empires, archival silence often indicates political discomfort. When someone's suffering becomes inconvenient to narrate, their name disappears from official memory. The Queen's final months in isolation were sanitized in state documents. Only fragments of testimony survive, written by sympathetic scribes, attendants, and women in court who risked their own safety to preserve her story. For those listening today, these hidden stories are the reason communities unite around remembering forgotten truths. Continuing this journey together builds collective accountability and honors those who endured injustice. If you believe these histories matter, then the mission of Dark Inquest history continues with you. Eventually, the king announced that the queen had committed offenses against propriety and palace order. The wording was vague by design. It allowed the court to enforce discipline without specifying the true cause, telling the truth. Her mistreatment continued privately, with the intention of compelling submission rather than causing spectacle. She remained dignified, unwilling to confirm allegations fabricated against her. The climax arrived quietly, not with dramatic confrontation, but with a symbolic moment: her final refusal to rewrite history. She was brought before royal officials and instructed to state publicly that her previous warnings were false. She stood in ceremonial silence, surrounded by men accustomed to obedience. She remained composed and did not retract her words. She accepted whatever consequence would follow. Royal records indicate that she endured treatment intended to break her resolve. The mistreatment was described euphemistically as disciplinary enforcement, lasting longer than anyone anticipated. Yet she did not renounce truth. She embodied the belief that moral duty outweighed personal comfort. At the end of her confinement, she was no longer viewed as a queen, but as a danger to established order. Her life did not end through public spectacle. Instead, she faded into carefully orchestrated obscurity. Official documents mention illness, withdrawal, and religious contemplation. Palace narratives reframed her integrity as instability. The advisors who once feared her voice ensured that her legacy became fragmented. Without archival detail, her suffering was preserved only through whispers, private letters, and testimony written by individuals unwilling to let her memory vanish. The aftermath shaped political culture more than many realized. Nobles who witnessed her ordeal learned a severe lesson. Honesty could lead to punishment, even within royalty. Truth became dangerous. Loyalty became silence. Women at court became more cautious, measuring each sentence carefully. They understood that their influence existed only when they did not confront male authority. They mourned her courage privately, because public mourning risked association with dissent. Common citizens heard rumors of her fate, sensing that the palace preferred secrecy over accountability. Trust in leadership diminished. A kingdom that punished truth encouraged widespread caution. People learned to hide grievances rather than express them. Monarchies that mistake silence for stability eventually face consequences. Without open communication, fear replaces loyalty, suspicion replaces unity, and control replaces trust. Generations later, scholars pieced together fragments of her life. They recognized that her warnings might have prevented political crisis, famine, and unrest if they had been taken seriously. Her honesty could have restored legitimacy rather than weakening it. But power structures rarely admit mistakes. The easiest way to protect the throne was to silence the queen. Her story survived not through royal chronicles, but through personal notes, hidden testimonies, and oral traditions among women in court. Some attendants who observed her resilience in confinement wrote quiet memorials. They did not describe physical detail because doing so would endanger themselves. Instead, they focused on her dignity, her moral clarity, and her refusal to accept falsehood. They emphasized that her suffering was not the result of betrayal, but the result of courage. Her legacy is a reminder that truth within an authoritarian structure is rarely rewarded. Systems built on absolute authority cannot tolerate honest reflection. And throughout history, women who dared to speak were treated as anomalies. Their punishment served as a warning, not only to them, but to every woman who might consider speaking openly in the future. We end where we began, inside palace walls, where beauty hides control, where ritual conceals fear, and where silence preserves power. The Queen's life demonstrates a universal pattern. Oppressed voices are often most accurate, yet they are least protected. She told the truth about her king, and the empire decided that silencing her was easier than reforming itself. Her tragedy is not unique. It echoes through countless royal households, religious hierarchies, imperial courts, and domestic dynasties. Systems prefer control to transparency, and individuals who challenge them rarely receive justice. Yet remembering her story honors every woman who endured mistreatment for speaking honestly. Today, her courage is a form of historical testimony, not written in official archives, but preserved in memory. A reminder that integrity does not always lead to safety, but it always leaves a moral imprint. The final line. Some queens ruled kingdoms, and some queens defended truth. History remembers only one of these openly, and it is our responsibility to remember the other. To keep the memory of buried stories alive, and to honor the women history refused to protect, continue this journey with Dark Inquest History, and subscribe to the channel.